Welcome back to the class, everyone. Today we're going to be continuing our guide on GL counters using non-Galactic Legends versus Galactic Legends. This continues to be really important in our current meta, where if you're a really good player, you're going to be facing people who have way more Galactic Legends than you, and you're going to need these extra tools to be able to take them down. That being said, not every single counter we're going to show here is going to be 100% great, but the whole point of this series is to relay that information. What are the risk points? What are the mods you need to have? What is the reliability of this? Is it something you can count on, or is it something you're going to do as a latch dish resource? So that being said, let's go ahead and get to the actual, not the actual fights, but the modding, and then we'll get to the actual fights right after. So I'll have a little bit more detailed of what kind of the minimum modding and relics and all that requirements a little bit later in the video. That will happen. But right now, if you want to really find out what, like, you know, Newt's crit chances or whatever, you can go back and you can pause these to find everything out. But the team we're going to be using here today is going to be Drevan, it's going to be Basilisk Unfallen, and then it's going to be mostly Separatists. And there are a few subs, and we'll get to those. But we're going to, yeah, the Separatists we're going to be using are Want, Newt, as well as Geonosian Brood Alpha. And I'm going ahead and I'm showing you the enemies mods too, just to be really transparent. Some of these mods are good, some are not so great. Like this Ray has a defense primary on her triangle. Ultimately, this it's kind of a wash, because you'll see that the characters we're taking in are also R4 against a full R7 team, and realistically we should be matching relics, and again we'll kind of get to that later. But the team it's not god modded, but it's also not trash. Like, you know, the Finn has 300 and I think it was like 27 speed or something like that. And again, we'll get into what your modding needs to look like to even beat the best of the best teams. This comp, I will make a comment on this real quickly. This comp also is not super ideal. The ideal comp that I would really want to show this against would be Haldo instead of 3PO, but the counter is more or less the same. You just have to finesse it a little bit more. So going in, let's get to the strategy here. You need to put the TM tech onto Drevan. This is very, very important, because Ray's always going to go first. After what, of course. That is a given. But for you to beat the Resistance hero Finn, or really their whole team, after they get their 30% speed bonus, or not 30%, but 30 flat speed bonus, you need to have that 15% TM tech onto Drevan to be able to get out there and to stop them. Because otherwise, my 350 speed Drevan would have gotten outsped by a 327 speed Finn because of the difference, or because of the Ray lead. So TM tech onto Drevan, and that means that we can fear the entire team. That is awesome. Tank tech has to go to the Brute. This is very, very important, because the enemy team has more than one way to strip the taunt without letting him get it back. So he has to have the tank tech to make sure he's consistently taunting. And then the med pack will eventually go to GPA. GPA is important because he's essentially just going to be keeping the Brute alive. Always use the fear onto JTR because it's a locked buff, so she can't just immediately dispel that one. She might dispel some of the later ones to come. But yeah, here we're just trying to play things really close to our chest. There is a little bit RNG with the debuffs, and again, we'll get to that, how reliable those are. When you have these dummy hits just to kind of get out, make sure to put them on Ray, because while Ray has 3 stacks of Inspired, I think, well, she just has Inspired in general, whenever a Drevan is gaining turn meter, she's gaining Mastery, which means she's getting offense, which means her big hit is going to do more damage. So again, with all these little hits, don't like break the fear on everyone else. Exactly like we did there, just try to take the Inspired off of Ray so she's not gaining bonus offense that is eventually going to kill us. So this wasn't super ideal. In a perfect world, I would very, very much like to have gotten Ray to damage unit, but we didn't, but we can still work with this. Other thing that I should mention that you should be doing with the reason why Newt is here is just pretty much to slow down the team. He has speed down, but also Extortion just kind of permanently slows down a character until they cleanse it. So Ray is highest priority for that, obviously, with her Galactic Legend speed. But after that, you can start putting on Finn, and you can get to a point where Newt can pretty much have Extortion on the entire team. So we tanked the ult rather well, and one of the reasons why we're able to tank that super well is because we've got GBA in there, and her damage is being split into 6 characters rather than between 5. Other really important thing, you got to ability block Ray. Since there really isn't any way to have Ray's hands tied behind her back with Fracture, because that doesn't work anymore, you have to have her ability blocked, otherwise you're going to hit a Whirlwind. Whirlwinds also, though, on the bright side, are not the end of the world, because the Brute will tank it, and then he'll just come back, so that's fine. One other thing that we've been doing that I should probably make a comment on is whenever we have to remove a debuff with Watt's Basic, which you always have to, it's a not super great part about this counter is you always have to remove a debuff. You can't just pass. And the reason why that's not great is because you actually, there are a ton of moments where you really do want, you want the ferocity on Basilisk Fallen and Darth Revan, because otherwise you don't get as much speed. We do just barely kill Rey there. I played this once earlier this morning. I didn't record it, but I played it once earlier this morning just to do my squad arena battle, and she actually did get her second ult, and we still survived. Actually, I think Watt ate it, but then we were able to kill her after she came back. So there isn't really a hard limit on how many ults the opponent can get, and I really don't. You guys saw how much we survived from this R7 Rey. If this whole team was, R7, we could pretty easily, I think, take an R9 Rey as well, because while she is missing a few bit of her stats there from relics, we are as well. And I mean, the battle is pretty much a wash here. There's the rest of this team is not going to take you out. I mean, you suffer a little bit from maybe a timeout risk because you're slightly decreasing turn meter with Basilisk Fallen, and at the same time you're keeping them in damage immunity, but it works out here. I don't think I've ever timed out with this, but you can't just take your time with it. You have to be proactive. So we ended up forfeiting that battle, but it was obviously a win. We were going to get it down in time. But yeah, I made this comment earlier, and I don't think I finished it. When you have to cleanse someone with Watt, you really, really want to make sure you do that on Darth Revan, because Basilisk Fallen's turns are important as well, and Darth Revan has turn meter to kind of make up, because the ferocity functions as speed for him and Basilisk. So Basilisk needs to keep her speed. Darth Revan is not so much important. Again, we open up here, and this time I'm specifically going to do something wrong so you guys can see what happens when we do something wrong. So we got the TM tech out to Darth Revan, and we got the shield tech out to the Brute. And one of the things that we did here was we're not going to knock down the stagger that's on the bros, and we're not going to put the health tech onto the Brute Alpha. That way you guys can kind of see what ends up happening when he gets killed and you don't have the Brute around immediately, and then bad things are going to happen. We'll just put it that way. We're kind of triggering that on purpose just to show you guys what would happen if it sometimes also happens on accident. So this is basically the fail point that we're gauging in on here, is what happens if they get the Brute down. So you can see that they got inspired, and this really isn't, overall this is really bad, and we'll get to that in the next fail point. Because when they get inspired, Rey starts to counter on her hits, and when she counters, she heals, and you really just can't kill her. So she gets her ult. As you can see, everyone survives, but because we don't have the health tech, we purposely didn't put on to show you guys this. We don't have the health tech onto GBA, so the tank is also not recovering, and now this is kind of what happens when you don't have that tank there, and as well as, Rey's doing all of her Rey things and counter and whatnot. So the rest of their team, I mean, they just get to whirlwind and obliterate us. So you can't really let the Brute go down without being able to bring him back, and the med pack is one way to do that. And the other thing is managing the enemy's turns so that they don't get inspired. And I try to focus on that a little bit more in this one. And ultimately, this is not this part of the video isn't to say that, oh, because of this you should do that. This is frankly just kind of showing that there is some RNG in this fight that just cannot be mitigated. So there's always a 15% chance to resist a debuff. We talked about that in the Jedi Revan versus SLKR fight, but different from that one where it can only really happen, there's only one RNG moment for it. This one, there's a ton. There are multiple moments where if Finn, specifically Resistance Hero Finn, resists the fear from Basilisk Fallen, or let's say the fear didn't go on him and he resists the debuffs, and he has just enough speed or more speed than Basilisk Fallen, it can just cost you the entire match. And while if you do have a huge mod advantage on your opponent, like let's say you have a 330 speed Basilisk Fallen and they have like a 270 Finn or something like that, yeah, that's going to make a big difference. But that's not how I would describe a good counter. A good counter shouldn't rely on your enemy having crappy mods. But it does help things. So yeah, in this fight, we don't specifically try to give the enemy an upper hand, but we kind of show what happened when the debuffs don't go our way. Finn did not get the stagger to be knocked immediately down before, and he didn't get the fear directly knocked down the first time we did it. So now he got inspired, he got a bunch of turns, and while we had the kind of fail-safe of GBA there, we lost him, and now Ray's countering, she's doing a bunch of damage at the same time. We can't make any headway with her because every single time that she's countering, she's getting a ton of damage in there. So again, we'll get to this in the overview, but I don't love this counter too much because of these reasons. There is just a little bit of RNG not a little bit. There's a fair amount of RNG that you just don't have control over, or that can only be mitigated by your opponent having really bad mods. So yeah, we would have been able to probably taken Ray out by now had she not been countering and stuff like that, and healing essentially back up constantly over the 50 or the 60% mark, so she's getting more whirlwinds. We do try to salvage this battle. You'll notice that I popped the protection with Watt over there for a second to see if we could get him to have everyone recover protection, because now not only is Ray about to get her second ult, but on top of that, we're also pretty low health and protection. Like, I don't think we had a lot of protection at all because of Resistance Hero Finn's or Poe's unique ability. But that part of the battle is going to end up being a loss. So let's just go ahead and get into the specifics of what this kind of looks like. We saw the overall strategy and where it can go wrong and how it goes wrong. Now, what do you need to actually be able to have it go right? So this is the overall modding. I actually don't even think this modding is that hard to get. The Darth Revan being 340 speed, that is rather expensive, but that is necessary, because if your Darth Revan, I didn't show it, but if your Darth Revan doesn't go before Resistance Hero Finn, because his base speed isn't high enough, even with the TM, you just get wrecked. Like, there's really nothing to do with it, especially if they have Halder in there. They're going to get the taunt up immediately, and you're not even going to be able to get Extortion onto Ray to slow her down. The rest of this is pretty simple. Basta Sean Fawn Watt should ideally be above 300. Again, the higher the better. The higher every single one of these 5 speeds can be, the more you are going to have a chance of mitigating RNG, but this is kind of the minimum to get it working. Also, this is not a turn order. Basta Sean Fawn does not need to go before Watt. That's not really a thing. If she does, cool. If she doesn't, also whatever. Same thing can be said about GBA and Newt. Faster the better, but at the end of the day, this is probably where you should be aiming. GBA, interesting thing enough, if you have to choose between health and protection on him, go for health. There's something really weird in his kit where his modded stats, the Brute takes his health and not his protection, which is weird, but we have to live with it. So pretty much my overview for where this team has to be is that its modding is decent. It's nothing too extreme. Like, you don't have to have like 160 speeds on every single character. You also don't have to have a specific turn order. You do need a pretty hefty set on Darth Revan though. Gear, this is decent. The reason why this is decent, different from the last one being awesome, is because you really want to match gear levels. Like, if your opponent has an R7 Rey, you really want an R7 Darth Revan to be able to get her down. You don't have to match it to the extreme of R9 Rey, R9 Darth Revan, but you need to keep the margins fairly close. If you go too wide, you just don't have the offense to get her down, and then she just doesn't die and, just ults you into next week. RNG factors, this one is pretty bad. So like I mentioned during the video, whereas the Generate Luke, Generate Revan, they had only like 1 or 2 real moments where something could go south and you could just be kind of done for regardless of your own plan or your own strategy. This one, there's a lot. There are a lot of times where if they just keep resisting Basta Sean Fallen's debuffs, regardless if you ever chalked up with a huge amount of potency in the Zeta and everything like that, it can just not go your way, and that's the match, and there's nothing you can do about it. For substitutes, we didn't talk about this yet, but we'll go ahead and talk about it now. Both of these, I think, do lower the viability of the counter, so I don't recommend them, but if you're in a tight spot and this is all you got, run with it. Nuke can be substituted for Thrawn. Fracture isn't as good as Extortion, because Extortion can spread to multiple characters, and it also stacks with speed down, whereas Thrawn just gets a Fracture off, and that's cool. It's not as useful as getting him on a bunch of characters. Also, Newt can survive. Even if Newt doesn't survive the first ult, he comes back because of the revive, and the ult doesn't negate revives, only Whirlwind does. The others, I think you can sub as GBA versus Malik. This is really risky, because this is assuming, A, it's not a high offense Rey, because you're not going to lose anyone if she uses her ult and there's only 5 characters. And B, you can't tank Whirlwinds. You just have to get really, really lucky and have every single time the Rey gets a turn she has when ready, Bastila Fallen has to have ability blocked her. That actually did happen in our first video, by the way. She didn't get off a single whirlwind, so that outcome is possible, but it's really not something that I would say people should be, you know, developing a counter to count on. So the overall viability of this non-GL counter, I would say, is bad. This is something you use when you're in a tight situation. This isn't something that you plan for, that you're like, okay, so I've got my Jedi Knight Luke and Jedi Knight Revan. That's going to take out SLKR every single time. I've got my Darth Revan and Watt squad that's going to beat Rey every time. I wouldn't plan it that way. You really should be looking for something a little bit heftier, and we'll get to those counters later on as well. But this is something that you should be using in a tight spot, or let's say you don't have an option to get Rey in the next, or you don't have an option to get a Galactic Legend in the next 6 months, and you also can't get, say, let's Star Killer's probably a better counter, or maybe even Gas, depending on the comp. You just don't have those characters. This is going to be your number one choice, I believe, assuming you can't just out defense them. So overall, that is the counter. Let me know what you guys thought. Let me know what your experience has been with this counter. Remember to like and subscribe, and as always, stay awesome.